2 members of the service were killed during that explosion. Another 12 people were injured. That includes 9 members of the East Sussex Fire and Rescue, 2 members of the public, and a police officer, a police sergeant. They all went to hospital. Their injuries are being assessed at the moment. Some have been released, some are still at hospital. There is a 200-metre cordon around the factory, and the advice from the Fire and Rescue Service is that the fire is going to need to be allowed to burn for a while, as there is concerned health and safety around acetylene tanks that might be present. We are conducting a full investigation as to the background and circumstances of this event. That's the police, health and safety, alongside the Fire and Rescue Service. I'll pass over to Gary.
Thank you. East Sussex Fire and Rescue Service obviously would like to give our condolences to the family and friends of officers of East Sussex Fire and Rescue Service. And Chief Fire Officer Desmond Pritchard has been with those families this evening, giving them the bad news at this particular time. One of the fire officers was a member of our control room staff who was also a retained fire officer, providing cover in the centre of the county of East Sussex. The other is a retired fire officer who is being re-employed and provides support at incidents for East Sussex Fire and Rescue Service. Obviously, our position at the moment is to provide assistance to the police in any investigation, but our primary concern is the welfare of the family and friends, and also other members of East Sussex Fire and Rescue Service at this time of need.
It sounds, Mr. Walsh, as though these officers who died today were very experienced officers. Can you tell me, just in as much detail as you can, I know that the details are sketchy, about the events leading up to that explosion and just how close they were in terms of trying to tackle this, please?
Obviously can't go into details in terms of where the personnel were involved in terms of the blaze and the explosion that occurred. East Sussex Fire and Rescue Service received a call just before 2 o'clock this afternoon. We're aware of an incident that occurred approximately an hour afterwards. We'd requested 10 appliances to attend that incident in the initial stages because of the scale of the incident and the potential impact. Yes, they are both experienced officers. One of them is 49 years of age and the other one is 63 years of age, support officer.
And how have the officers of the East Sussex Fire Brigade been coping with the news as it broke this afternoon?
Obviously, we all think of the family and friends of this sad time. We've put support mechanisms in place with our other agencies, the other emergency services, have provided support to our personnel. The British Red Cross Fire Victim Support Scheme are helping our crews. We have our own doctors and occupational health who are supporting us. At this time, our consideration is maintaining fire and rescue service for East Sussex, assisting those staff who have been majorly affected by the scene this afternoon. Many of them have now gone home to be with their family and friends.
What can you tell us about the injured officers?
The injured officers, we're aware that a number of them have already returned to their families. We're awaiting outcomes from the assessment at the hospitals in terms of the 5 of the officers are still there.
Assistant Chief Constable, can you tell us anything more about the explosion itself? Was it within the actual fireworks warehouse, or was it, we're hearing about a steelworks that was next door?
It's all speculation at the moment. We have members of our major investigation team who are talking with the health and safety executive and experts within the Fire and Rescue Service, and it's too early to say or speculate as to exactly what has happened or the cause of it.
Can you describe the scene? Obviously we haven't been able to get close to it because it's so dangerous, but for people that can't see it, I mean, what is the scene like up there?
Well, I think you can see from the helicopter pictures that have been going out over the media that it is a huge fire, and it's something which is, as I understand it from Gary, that's likely to be burning for the rest of the night, and I suspect it's going to take us some time before we're able to bring the whole scene under control.
And what happens in terms of those who've been evacuated now from their houses in the area?
I think about 10 people had to be evacuated from their houses, from surrounding premises. They were all given support by the local district council, and they'll be looked after until they can go home.
Can you tell us which stations the dead officers were based at?
No, I'm afraid we can't release that information at this time.
And the support officer was 49 years of age, is that?
No, the fire officer was 49, the support officer was 63. He's a retired fire officer that's retained in a different role, working for East Sussex Fire and Rescue Service for a number of years.
Is the fire actually out?
No, the fire's not out. We've contained it to one building. That will be, as the Assistant Chief Constable stated earlier, we'll keep a watching brief. We can't make an attack on the fire at the moment because of the potential for acetylene cylinders to be involved in the fire, and therefore we've put in place, with the police's help, an exclusion zone of around about 200 metres from the fire itself.
So it's going to be some time before you can really get in and investigate what's happening.
Yes, we'll be making regular assessments of the scene with our colleagues from the other emergency services.
Can you tell us tomorrow what your plan of action is going to be? Presumably there'll be officers here all night.
Yes, we've got around about 40 police officers who are involved in the 200 metre zone. I would anticipate that they will remain away from the fire, depends on the advice from the experts, all night, and then there'll be an assessment at first light tomorrow.
Let's talk about the injuries to the hospital. Are any of them classed as serious or life-threatening?
Not aware of the fire service officers being any serious injuries, but obviously they're continually under assessment.
And what are their injuries?
I'm afraid I'm not aware of that detail at this time.
How many have been released from hospital? Do you know that number?
We understand that 4 of our officers have been released from the hospital.
And how many remain?
5.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Everyone got everything?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, welcome.
So there you hear from the Assistant Chief Constable of Sussex Police and the Deputy Chief Fire Officer of the East Sussex Fire Brigade. Terrible time, obviously, for that particular fire brigade, having lost 2 of their firefighters, both very experienced men, we're told, had been involved in many firefighting operations in the past, but tonight, of course, their colleagues mourn their death in this huge explosion that engulfed the fireworks warehouse just a couple of miles up the road from here. And the investigation now really underway to determine what exactly caused the initial fire, the subsequent explosion, and of course if all the health and safety regulations were followed both at the fireworks company and also at with regards to the rescue service operation in the immediate minutes and hours after they arrived at the scene to try to tackle this large fire.
Mark, it seems particularly poignant, doesn't it, as Norman Baker reflected earlier on, the local MP, that we're talking about the loss of lives here of people who essentially put their lives on the line for other people. To hear that a retained fire officer of 49 and a retired support officer, someone who'd dedicated his life to the fire service, has also been killed in this at the age of 63, does add even more poignancy to what had already been and been known to be a tragic situation.
Yes, and I think the issue we retained firefighters as well is something that I suppose does have great prominence around here, because it is in large parts a rural area around these villages, and many of the firefighters who provide that first response and attend incidents like this are retained firefighters. They have their normal daytime jobs, but they're there ready to respond and to put their lives on the line, quite literally, when they are called upon to do so. there isn't a busy area in terms of, if you compare it to London or whatever, in terms of the fires that they might be called to on a regular basis, but they're there and they're providing that protection to their local communities, and they're doing it on a voluntary basis. Local community are very grateful to any community, any rural community is always grateful to those retained firefighters who do it on a voluntary basis. And I'm sure that here in this village tonight, the news that local firefighters have been caught up in this tragedy, there will be a great deal of sadness expressed towards the local fire brigade and those men who put their life on the line to save their life and property.
And also very interesting, Mark, to get the perspective on exactly why this fire is being left to burn out tonight. Jason Winter from Festival Fireworks UK, his family owning that business, talking with a sense of anger about it being left to burn, but clearly the fire service making it clear there that that was purely down to health and safety reasons.
Well, indeed, I mean, we have had a huge explosion there. It's claimed the lives of 2 members of East Sussex Fire Brigade. It's put 12 other people in hospital. It's clearly far too dangerous to risk any more emergency service personnel in what possibly it was going to be a futile exercise anyway in trying to bring this fire under control and save part of the property, because you heard the Assistant Chief Constable there alluding to the pictures that Sky News had been providing its viewers from the helicopter earlier on. That gave a graphic illustration of the devastating scene on the ground, the absolute power of this explosion that ripped apart the building and sent debris from that building scattered over a wide radius around that central seat of the fire, which was still burning, and all this debris on the ground was still burning. I doubt if there was an awful lot left of the immediate building to save, and of course the emergency services here deciding, I'm sure many people would agree quite rightly, that given the events of earlier on this afternoon, with the tragic loss of 2 lives and the injuring of 12 people, that it was just far too risky to try to save what may have remained of that building.
Mark, Halland in the nearby village of Ringmer, the village is closest to this warehouse, and it does seem the small rural community has really rallied round to help.
Yes, we heard that. I think a total of 10 properties have been affected in terms of local people having been evacuated. The security cordon, which is extended around this particular warehouse, affects 10 families. So those families, 7 of them have come here to the local village hall, and we understand that arrangements are being made either to put them into some kind of sheltered accommodation or perhaps to house them with other families nearby, other houses that are outside that exclusion zone, and people, yes, certainly being very generous and offering their vacant rooms to members, to neighbours of theirs who've been caught up in these events today.
Mark, also viewers emailing in, wondering about what else is in the vicinity, people talking about an animal sanctuary very nearby as well.
Yes, I think there certainly is an animal sanctuary nearby, but you heard from the owner of the firework factory there that that shouldn't really be of particular concern to people, in the sense that it is a good couple of miles away and wasn't directly affected in any way. I'm sure the loud bangs would have been disturbing for those animals in that sanctuary, but in terms of actually being in the line of fire, if you like, from these explosions, it wasn't. But of course, those nearest the fire, the people, of course, that owned the warehouse and the emergency services that came to help them to save their property, were in the line of fire and were caught up in this. And tragically, you know, 2 of their number have been killed tonight, 12 injured, and the investigation will now get underway to, let me just move out of the way here before I get run over by the support unit. So, as I say, the investigation will now try to determine, if they can, just what exactly caused this fire. No indication at all from the emergency service personnel here that there's anything suspicious to look out for with regard to that fire. And as for what caused the explosion, well, I asked the Assistant Chief Constable whether that steel factory that is just next to the fire itself, next to the warehouse, the fireworks factory, was caught up in it. He couldn't really answer that. Let's just hear what they said a few minutes ago.
Shortly before 2 o'clock this afternoon, emergency
with Anna Jones and Colin Brazier.
Good morning. Let's start this hour with some breaking news that's just coming to us, that the number of people charged by police today's blaze at a fireworks warehouse has been named as retired firefighter Brian Wembridge. The 63-year-old was working as a photographer for the East Sussex Fire and Rescue Service. Army bomb disposal officers have arrived at the scene near Lewes in East Sussex to carry out an investigation into the blaze, the remains of which you can see from these live helicopter pictures. 9 other members of the Fire and Rescue Service, a police officer, 2 members of the public were injured in this very substantial blaze. There were still some secondary fires burning into the hours this morning, which now appear at least to have subsided, if not gone out altogether. But there were fears, certainly from the fire service, that there could be secondary explosions, and there will be many questions being asked about what happened here. Hopefully some answers at that press conference a little later on this morning.
Take you back now to what's left of the fireworks warehouse near Lewes in East Sussex, the scene of an enormous fire overnight, which started with an explosion which was so large it could be heard 12 miles away. And as you can see, there's little left now of that warehouse. These are the scenes live now from our Skycopter. We are expecting a news conference to be held by emergency services in the next few minutes, where we will get more details of what happened, or what police and fire brigade believe happened. And our correspondent Mark White is there at the scene. And Mark, and I suppose the investigation will start as soon as possible, not just into how the fire started, but how 2 firefighters came to lose their life in that fire.
Yes, I mean, the key question, certainly as far as the health and safety investigators are concerned, is just what happened here, and whether all the health and safety regulations were followed to the letter. You can see from the Sky helicopter pictures, it is just a scene of complete devastation down there. A number of buildings, a good collection of buildings, the majority of them either completely destroyed or very badly damaged. If the Sky helicopter can just move in, you can see what looks to be the remains of a van. It's probably down towards the bottom of the screen. There you go. Just in amongst that wreckage, some of the wreckage still smouldering away there, and that just gives you an indication of the utter devastation and immense power of this explosion. That was the outside perimeter of what we believe was the main festival fireworks building, where a lot of these fireworks, tons of fireworks, were stored. And you can see that building has just been obliterated. The van outside what was the front of the door there, just about the only indication you have that that was once a building.
OK, Mark, for now, thanks very much indeed. And now to that firework warehouse fire now. We can get a view on it from Mike Penning. He's the Tory MP for Hemel Hempstead, where the Buncefield fire took place. And Mr Penning himself is a former firefighter. Mr Penning, what is your reaction to the news that 2 firefighters have died in this blaze?
Well, it's a fireman's and a fireman's family's worst nightmare, and our thoughts and prayers are with these heroes, who is exactly what they are, that have gone and committed themselves to looking after their community. These are part-time firemen that want to serve their community, that have gone in to protect their community, and very sadly lost their lives. And our thoughts must be with some of the injured people as well. Some of them, I understand, are very, very seriously injured, and our thoughts and prayers are with those and their family at the moment.
Are you surprised that we did see fatalities as a result of handling a fire like this?
Well, we were so lucky nearly a year ago. This is quite spooky. Almost exactly a year ago when we had our fire in Buncefield, and we were very, very lucky there that we didn't have anybody fatally injured. But these sorts of fires, these sorts of explosions, this is where the blast is a fireman's worst fear. And I understand there were LPG and oxyacetylene tanks inside there, and we won't know for a little while until exactly what happened. It sounds as if one of these has exploded, which, as I say again, is a fireman's worst nightmare. It's totally unpredictable, which is, if you look at the pictures at the moment, why you're not seeing firemen walking around inside there is because these tanks are likely to explode long after the fire's gone out, and so they have to actually cool them down an awful lot.
So in a situation like this, are there very stringent health and safety regulations concerning how firefighters can operate?
Well, we have to make a decision. Firemen are the bravest people in the world, and decisions have to be made as whether they're going to go and save property or save lives. One of the things I was very concerned about at Buncefield, once we realised no one was actually trapped or injured inside, is that no fireman's life was lost because we were trying to save an oil tank. And I hope and pray that no one was actually lost here today because we were trying to save a factory. Their job is to save lives. Property can be replaced, lives can't.
Now, we understand that the bomb disposal unit has moved in. Why is that? I mean, that sounds like there's a bomb there, but that's not the reason, is it?
No, it will be to do with the actual chemicals and everything that have been stored here. I understand this is a pyrotechnic firework factory where they have very, very large fireworks, mostly used for the, public displays and things like that. So what they want to make sure is, these are the experts. I mean, seeing the bomb disposal people there is actually a sign of reassurance. People shouldn't be worried that they're there. They know how to deal with these sorts of situations and how volatile these sorts of chemicals and explosives can be. So it's good to see them there.
OK, well, Mike Penny, we will get more details, of course, from the police and the fire brigade shortly. We're expecting a news conference, but for now, thanks very much indeed for that.
Thank you.
Well, Tony Blair.
Back to Lewes in East Sussex, or near to Lewes. This is the devastation that's resulted from a fire at a fireworks warehouse there. We can talk to the local MP now, Norman Baker. Norman Baker, your reaction to the news that this fire has taken the lives of 2 firemen?
Well, it's desperately sad, very sad indeed. It's the first loss of life from the East Sussex Fire Service on active duty for many years. And our thoughts obviously go out to the families and friends of those who've lost their lives putting public service first. They've gone out there, done their job, and very sadly they've paid the highest possible price.
Yes, I know we're going to get some more information. You're in the room now where a news conference is about to be held. People are gathering now, as I understand it. But from your information, when was the fire first known about? Do we know how emergency services were first alerted?
Well, there was a fire yesterday afternoon. In fact, I heard the fire engines went past me as I was at a carol service, in fact, in Ringmer, in the village here. And at that time, obviously, it was a serious fire because the number of fire tenders attending made it obvious that was the case. But that was before the massive explosion, which seems to have caused the major problems and the loss of life. But obviously, we'll hear more about that from the county fire officer and others when the press conference begins.
Did you hear the explosion yourself?
I'm sorry?
Did you hear the explosion?
I didn't hear the explosion. No, I didn't. No, I didn't, but I gather it was heard in Uckfield, which is some miles away, so it was clearly a very major explosion.
Now,
local residents described it as sounding like a bomb.
There are 2 firefighters, as we say, have died in this fire. What can you tell us about them?
Well, I think we'll hear details from the county fire officer when he makes his statement in a short time, but obviously I think one's known to be a retained firefighter and one was, I think, a video technician, and there are 2 others who've been seriously injured, I think, are in hospital, and others indeed have been injured but have been subsequently released. But it's a very sad day for all of us here in East Sussex.
Of course, I mean, it must make an enormous impact on the fire brigade itself, but also for the whole community.
Well, the fire brigade, I think, regards itself as a family, and to lose one member from anywhere in the community is very sad. This is the first firefighter, I understand, to have died this year in England and Wales, and it's very, very sad that it's here in East Sussex, and our thoughts are definitely with the firefighters of East Sussex today.
Meanwhile, of course, an investigation will be underway, not just into how the fire started, but into how it came to be that those 2 firefighters did lose their lives.
Well, of course, we must seek to find out why the fire started, what lessons, if any, there are to be learned, whether any changes to regulations or licensing processes are necessary. And I think we're about to have the press conference, so I'll leave you at this point. Thank you.
OK, Norman Baker, thanks very much indeed for your time.
Well, detectives investigating in East Sussex, a press conference in the wake of that warehouse fire about to begin.
With the daylight hours, we're now able to continue with our assessment alongside the Fire and Rescue Service. The fire is now proceeding. However, there are some concerns about some cylinders, perhaps up to 20 cylinders, gas cylinders, which are on the premises, and that will require some very careful assessment and handling. Health and Safety Executive, Fire and Rescue Service, and also EOD are involved in that, and that may take some time. The situation I gave you last night with the casualties is the same, as well as the 2 fatalities from the East Sussex Fire and Rescue Services. There were 12 casualties. As we speak, I think 4 people are still in hospital, 2 from the Fire and Rescue Service, 1 police officer, police sergeant who is at Eastbourne Hospital, requires surgery, and 1 other member of the public at Brighton, Royal Sussex County Hospital, who is in a serious but stable condition. The police-led investigation alongside the Fire and Rescue Service and also Health and Safety Executive continues, and that will take some time. It is likely that we will not be able to get into the scene for a while, and then the forensic examination will continue. At the same time, we are interviewing a number of people who have information and are witnesses surrounding the background and the events of yesterday afternoon. I'll now pass on to the head of East Sussex Fire and Rescue, Des Pritchard.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. This is a very difficult time for the staff of East Sussex Fire and Rescue Service, but in particular for 2 families. And I have asked you previously, and I know you have respected that difficult time for those 2 families. It is also very difficult for a number of our fire officers who were on the scene at the time when the explosion took place and had to assist in recovering their colleagues along with police officers, ambulance service personnel and members of the public. It is a very difficult time for my staff, but our thoughts are with the families who lost their personnel, who lost their loved ones in the incident yesterday. Just to confirm a couple of issues for you, the reason why we are concerned about cylinders is that if acetylene cylinders are heated or are subject to significant shock, they can explode without warning. And that's why we have a 200-metre exclusion zone in place. So it's because acetylene cylinders may have been involved in the fire or may have been subject to severe shock due to the explosion. We need to ascertain the location and the nature of those cylinders before we can determine further action. That's why we have the bomb disposal unit here. Not because there is a bomb on the site, but we are using their vehicles, their remote controlled vehicles, to access the site to get further details and information for us with regard to the cylinders. We need to ensure the cylinders have been cooled for 24 hours before it is safe to put a team onto that site. It's very difficult. There are only about 4 hours of daylight left in this day. We need to consider very carefully our plan of action. The Assistant Chief Constable has given you details on the casualties and those that are in the hospital currently. If there's any further information when we've finished this briefing, then I'm happy to answer your questions to give you that further information. I'll now hand over to Sussex Ambulance.
Just to say really, I believe that all the services worked very well together, especially yesterday. Proud of the fact that we liaised so well and such good teamwork, and our deepest sympathies to you and to the families involved.
Mr. K. Mark Point from Sky News. Can I just ask you first of all, really the investigation, I know it is at an early stage. Have you managed to establish whether that explosion was something that affected or really evolved from the fireworks warehouse, or whether it was perhaps the steelworks next door with the oxyacetylene. And also, if I could just ask Mr. Pritchard, as far as the continuing efforts to put out the blaze and get into the area is concerned, do you think it's likely now to be maybe tomorrow before it will be safe enough to get in there?
Shall I begin with the investigation? It really is early days at the moment. As you can appreciate, the scene was shut down very early, very soon after the explosion. We've backed off. We've got a 200-metre cordon at present, and no activity, no investigation activity at the scene has taken place since then. So we do not know what the cause of the fire was, and we do not know the sequence of events which led to that explosion. That's all yet to be ascertained.
From the Fire and Rescue Services perspective, there was a severe fire just after yesterday lunchtime, to which we made an attendance, and it was an escalating incident, and therefore we sent more resources to support that. During that operation, there was a significant explosion. We need to ascertain, with the help of Sussex Police, Scenes of Crimes officers and the Health and Safety Executive, precisely what caused that explosion. However, the scene is still potentially very dangerous at the moment, and until we can safely judge with regard to the acetylene cylinders whether or not we can allow people on the site, we're taking a cautious approach to the operations.
And are you confident that all the appropriate health and safety procedures were fully adopted yesterday during the height of this fire?
That's why we're carrying out a detailed investigation, and we will ascertain those details in conjunction with Sussex Police and the Health and Safety Executive.
Your fire service, obviously it's a very rural fire brigade, it's quite a small fire brigade. Many of these officers, as you say, will have known each other. How have they been affected, and how are they coming to terms with the events of yesterday?
It is a very difficult time, I have to say. It was a very traumatic and shocking event. And to lose two of your colleagues in one incident, clearly, as I'm sure you would understand, will impact upon all members of the Fire and Rescue Service. And we have been very well supported by Sussex Police and Sussex Ambulance Service in trying to manage that scenario. Nonetheless, there are some of my officers who were close to the scene who are particularly traumatised by that event. And equally, some of the crews that had to recover their own colleagues. You can imagine how traumatic that was. And we are trying to manage that on their behalf to ensure that they're properly cared for. But I must emphasise our focus is on the two families that lost a loved one yesterday.
Richard, Robert Hall, BBC. Could you follow up on what Colin asked there? Obviously, it's not too early to be talking about the name or culture or anything else. But obviously, those of us who don't know how fires were wonder how it was, given the nature of the site and the fact that the responding emergency services knew what the site was, how it was that people were sufficiently close to be so terribly injured and to lose their lives. Could you just explain that?
As the responding crews would have carried out what they would consider to be a dynamic risk assessment, and they would have made a judgment and assessment about what the appropriate tactics were at that time. I'm unable to comment in any detail on those tactics, but the investigation will establish those facts, and once that investigation has established those facts, they will become public knowledge.
But they would have proceeded with caution automatically because of the nature of the site, is what you're saying?
There are standard operating procedures, and there is what we call a dynamic risk assessment. So they judge the risk, they weigh up the risk in terms of what they're seeking to achieve. And the nature of operational firefighting does mean that on occasions, firefighters put themselves in situations where other members of other organisations simply wouldn't. That's the nature of the work of the Fire and Rescue Service. But it would be, I'd be commenting from an uninformed position if I went into detail at that time. That's why we're carrying out a thorough investigation.
Can you tell us how close to the site they were when they were, those who were killed
I think in the light of the investigation it would be unhelpful for any of us to make any assumptions, to speculate or to make any judgments. What I can assure you is that the police-led investigation alongside the Fire and Rescue Service and the Health and Safety Executive will be looking at the whole range of issues, the background to this event, how it was started and what the sequence of events were at the scene. Because the fact is that 2 people have died and 12 people have been injured, and that is a huge tragedy in itself and warrants an investigation to the utmost detail and standards.
Can I just ask about the acetylene canisters? You say you've got to determine a precise location, but can you say who owns those canisters? They were not part, presumably, of the fireworks warehouse, or were they?
We just ascertained there was more than one occupier on the curtilage, on the whole site, which we're just trying to ascertain those details. And we need to ascertain those details to ascertain the manifest, precisely what's on that entire site. And again, once we've got those details, that will form part of our investigation.
But you obviously know the acetylene is there, so presumably the owners of that acetylene have told you. I mean, can you tell us what is the, who are the other people on that site apart from the people who own the fireworks?
There are at least 2 premises in the entire curtilage. There is a fireworks factory, a fireworks storage facility, and there is also a steel fabrication facility. The fire, so I understand, and this is so I understand, we need to ascertain the detail occurred in the fireworks premises. We need to ascertain how the explosion occurred, and I'm sure some of you have seen aerial photographs. The scene is completely devastated, and the explosion may have caused fires in other parts of the site curtilage. But again, it would be inappropriate of me to comment at this stage in any detail, because I may misinform you, and I simply wouldn't want to misinform you. We do need to fully investigate this, and I owe a duty to my staff, but in particular to the 2 families, to do that. These are not faceless members of staff. I know those 2 people personally. This hurts me. And so I'm sure you'll bear with the Fire and Rescue Service and the police and Sussex Ambulance as we seek to resolve this incident.
Mr Pritchard, I mean, I know that you, at this stage you're not officially naming those 2 firefighters, but from what you know of them, what can you tell us about them? I gather they were veterans of the service.
The 2 persons that sadly lost their lives were experienced and close members of our Fire and Rescue Service. But I'm sure you understand that until formal identification has taken place, it would be wrong to release the names. And we do owe respect to the 2 families involved. And I'm sure you all understand that at this stage, that formal identification has not yet taken place. And I'd ask you to bear with the 2 families involved. I'd ask you all, as a personal plea from me, as a Chief Fire Officer, not to put pressure on those families. They do need to grieve at this time. They need support and love and care.
On the cylinders, you said you need 24 hours to be sure that they're cool before you go in. From where do you start measuring that 24 hours?
That's a standard operating practice. What we would normally do is, once the heating has finished, we would seek to put what we would call a cooling jet on them, so to cool the cylinder down. That would be the standard operating procedure. But we've been unable to get what we would call a fixed monitor in place, or water on the cylinders to cool them down. So what we can also use are thermal imaging cameras to see whether there are any hot spots in the cylinder. And we need to ascertain whether the shock from the explosion has also started off a reaction within the cylinder that could cause it to explode. Hence the bringing in the bomb disposal unit with their specialist remote control vehicles, so they can do that. So at the moment, the crews on the site with the incident commander are liaising with HSE, Sussex Police and the bomb disposal unit to try and get that information. And again, when we have more information, we will certainly make it known to you.
So there's no approximate time you can say that you might be going into the site?
No, we can't say that with any certainty at this stage. We would clearly want to resolve this as soon as we can, but we have to recognise the potential dangers that may still exist, and I'll be guided by the incident commander who is at the scene.
Richard Lincoln, BBC. Can I just check, when you said about the casualties, one police officer from Eastbourne and one civilian. Can you tell us what happened to the police officer and how the civilian is involved?
The police sergeant was present at the scene. He was injured during the explosion. He went to Eastbourne Hospital. He was immediately given some support from his family, and also the local inspector spent some time there this afternoon, and the divisional commander visited him late yesterday evening. His injuries will require surgery. He's got leg injuries, and he clearly is still in some shock from what was a very, very traumatic incident yesterday, but we're providing all the support that's necessary.
And the civilian?
The civilian is serious but stable at Brighton, at the Royal Sussex County Hospital. He was present at the scene. The reason for him being present is yet to be ascertained. Again, we're providing support. He's got chest injuries, but we understand he should make a recovery. But
you don't know whether he was working at the factory?
I don't know that.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. That's all the questions.
Police and fire and rescue officers in charge of that operation there at the fireworks factory near Lewes and East Sussex. Let me just sum up some of the things that they told us there. They detailed the list of casualties, 2 fatalities. They pointed out that they weren't officially naming those 2 fire crew, but they called them experienced and close members of the fire brigade. They say that the formal identifications had not yet taken place. They said there were 12 casualties in all, 4 still in hospital. That included 2 fire officers, 1 police officer who was in Eastbourne Hospital requiring surgery, and a member of the public who was in a serious but stable condition. They pointed out that the police investigation would take some time, and they as yet didn't know the cause of the fire. And one of the reasons it was going to take so long was because they couldn't get to the scene for a while. There's some concern that although the fire's receding, as you can see from our live pictures there is concern about some cylinders on the site, and if they're heated or subject to a shock, and the explosion that happened last night could be such a shock, those cylinders could explode without warning, and as a result there's a 200-metre exclusion zone around it, and instead of sending people in, they're going to send in robots. They're sending in robots from the bomb disposal unit, a sort of a remote way to try and get details about the scene, thermal imaging cameras as well to establish where the hot spots are. But those cylinders need to cool for at least 24 hours before they're safe. As regards the fatalities, the fire brigade's officer there, Des Pritchard, quite emotional, said it was a very difficult time for the East Sussex Fire Brigade, but he said the thoughts were very much with the families at this time. Well, you heard our reporter Mark White there asking the questions at that news conference, and Mark, there's still an awful lot of questions surrounding this fire, aren't there?
Yes, there are many unknowns for the emergency services, simply because they just can't get anywhere near that scene. It is still far too dangerous. In fact, you can probably see from the helicopter shots on occasions, the helicopter will come out to show a number of emergency service vehicles, fire engines and police cars and ambulances, which have essentially just been abandoned on the roadway there. After that explosion, everyone was just evacuated very quickly indeed from that scene, and the actual command post is just a bit further down the road. That's where everybody is congregated at the moment, waiting to see what that Army bomb disposal robotic probe comes up with in terms of the hotspots still on the site. But it's quite clear from the pictures that the Skycopter has been showing us over the last couple of hours that there are still pockets of flames within the burning rubble down on the ground there in this industrial complex. Most of the buildings have either been completely destroyed or very badly damaged. And of course the rescue services, the emergency services, want to get in there to try to establish as quickly as they can just what went wrong. You heard us asking them whether they, at this stage, believe that all the health and safety procedures were followed correctly, and in response to that they say, well, it's very early, of course, to say that, because that will form a big part of the subsequent inquiry. But what they do is they carry out what they described as a dynamic risk assessment. Essentially, the officers on the ground, knowing the kinds of risks there are, and of course there were risks with this particular blaze, as it was a fireworks factory. There were huge explosive devices within there. It was specializing, this particular company, in pyrotechnic devices, so much bigger fireworks than the normal ones that you might buy down at the corner newsagents. So it was a dangerous situation. There were multiple smaller explosions before the very large explosion that claimed the lives of those firefighters and injured 12 other people. And they would have been carrying out a risk assessment. Now, whether they did, at the end of the day, get too close to that, well, it was clear they were too close to the site when it exploded, but whether or not they followed the full health and safety procedures, knowing the risks that there were, well, that's something for the inquiry to determine at a much later stage.
Mark White, thanks very much indeed.
Mouldering. The investigation began today into what caused a huge explosion at a fireworks depot in East Sussex.
2 men who died in the blast yesterday have been named as Geoff Wicker, a part-time firefighter, and Brian Wembridge, a fire support officer. Tonight, a 200-metre exclusion zone around the depot is still in force. There are fears that up to 20 acetylene cylinders on site could explode.
Well, our reporter Isla Traquair is there for us tonight. Isla.
Well, yes, I'm at one of the many roadblocks that are still in place tonight. An indication of just how unsafe they still deem the scene to be. But that's no surprise, really, given the size of the blaze and the explosions last night. Well, earlier we had a first look at the true scale of this firework tragedy. The devastation in daylight, and the closest anyone can get to the fireworks storage site in East Sussex. 20 oxyacetylene tanks at risk of exploding prevent emergency services from re-entering the site. Amateur footage from yesterday evening shows rockets, Catherine wheels and Roman candles blasting into the air. But explosions insignificant compared to what happened next. It was at this point the 2 men from East Sussex Fire and Rescue Service are thought to have been killed. Soon after, further blasts, flying debris and a colossal amount of acrid smoke forced firefighters to retreat, allowing the blaze to take its course.
What we can see from the air is that the main building to Festival Fireworks has been completely flattened. All that remains is the roof, which is lying on the ground. Now, this was a building that was made with reinforced concrete and steel. We can also see that there are 3 other substantial buildings which have been destroyed, as well as a residential house which we believe belongs to the owners, and there are flames still burning away there today. What's surprising, though, is we can see just how close this fireworks storage building was to so many residential homes and a caravan park.
Occupants of the houses say the building shook with every explosion. All have been evacuated until the area is declared safe. Meanwhile, firefighters and bomb experts have been assessing the scene from a safe distance using thermal imaging cameras.
We would clearly want to resolve this as soon as we can, but we have to recognise the potential dangers that may still exist, and I'll be guided by the incident commander who is at the scene.
As fire crews await the all-clear to re-enter the site, their thoughts quite clearly remain with their fallen colleagues.
Isla, this was, of course, a terrible tragedy for the families of the firefighters, but are there now questions being asked about the safety of the operation?
Well, absolutely, and I just a short time ago asked the chief fire officer here exactly why one of the men, who was a support officer, a cameraman, was obviously in such a dangerous location when he wasn't an essential personnel there fighting the fire. What he told me was that there were in fact 9 people injured during that major blast, including 2 police officers and a member of the public, which would indicate that they weren't in fact standing near the core of the fire. But obviously this is one thing that they're going to establish during the investigation. Now that investigation is still being hampered, as we heard, because of these acetylene cylinders. However, they are hoping to access the site tomorrow morning in daylight, where they'll get a true picture of what may have happened. But it's likely to be some weeks before they can establish the exact facts and how such a tragedy could have occurred.
Isla, thank you.
A community
Good afternoon. Investigators are still waiting for the all-clear to enter the site where 2 firemen were killed on Sunday. Geoff Wicker and Brian Wembridge died in a massive explosion during the blaze at a fireworks depot in East Sussex. Catherine Carpenter is in Halland now, and Catherine, tributes have been pouring in, haven't they?
Yes, they have. We learned this morning that East Sussex Fire and Rescue have set up a memorial fund for the 2 men, and books of condolence have been opened across the southeast, including at a number of fire stations. The BBC has also opened its own book of condolence. That's online and can be found at bbc.co.uk/Southern Counties. Now, earlier today I was in Heathfield, which was the home of Mr. Wicker. He had 2 daughters and he was well known locally.
Big shock. It's just quite a tragedy, really.
It's very, very sad, the whole aspect of that, you know. I didn't, you know, as I said, I didn't know them myself, but it would have been, you know, people devastated, really.
It's a tremendous loss when something like that happens. You know, one of your own, really.
Well, all the firefighters at Heathfield are retained firefighters, and earlier today the chairman of the parish council told me that the whole town is grateful for the work they do and mourning their loss.
There's a sense of shock that Mr. Wickham has lost his life in his public duty in protecting the public, and we certainly, on behalf of all the people of Heathfield, send our condolences to his family and to the family of the other fire officer from Crowborough who lost his life.
Yes, Catherine, both men will obviously be very much missed. What's happening at the scene of the fire now?
Well, we understand that the investigators still haven't been allowed on. It's about 2 miles behind me, but I understand that they are hoping to gain access at some point this afternoon, and we'll obviously bring an update as soon as that happens. But at the moment, this community is still very much trying to come to terms with what happens. I spoke to somebody who'd been evacuated from the scene. She said that she's still not being allowed back in her house at the moment, and a nearby animal sanctuary say they haven't been allowed back onto their premises either. So there's still some confusion here in the area, mixed very much with a sense of grief.
All right, Catherine, thanks very much. People living near a notorious accident black...
Good evening. Welcome to South East Today with Natalie Graham and me, Rob Smith. It's emerged that the company which owned a fireworks warehouse that exploded, killing 2 firemen, has previously been fined for storing explosives without a licence. Tonight, as investigators begin to search the site at Shortgate near Lewes for forensic evidence, friends and colleagues of those that died, Brian Wembridge and Geoff Wicker, have been paying them emotional tributes. Catherine Carpenter reports.
A terrifying and tragic display. As the festival fireworks depot burned on Sunday, emergency crews rushed to the scene. A huge explosion tore through the site, injuring 12 people and killing 63-year-old Brian Wembridge and 49-year-old Geoff Wicker. Today, the chief fire officer paid a very personal tribute to his colleagues.
Brian was an extremely popular member of staff, respected by all in the service, and he will be sadly missed. He had tremendous enthusiasm for the service, all of its work, but in particular the contribution it made to community safety. He leaves a wife and 2 sons.
Brian Wembridge joined East Sussex Fire and Rescue in 1961, but although he'd retired, he still worked for their support service. Recently, a BBC programme filmed him taking part in this community project. Roger Bradgate was his colleague for more than 30 years.
He was one of the most kindest men I knew. He was always a good friend. He was there as a friend without asking when he was needed. Caring, compassionate, very much the family man.
Geoff Wicker was another well-known member of the service. He worked as a retained firefighter at Heathfield and full-time at the communications centre.
Geoffrey was a very warm and generous person, highly respected for the dual roles he played in East Sussex Fire and Rescue Service, supporting safety of the public. He will be greatly missed by his many, many friends and colleagues.
Geoff Wicker lived in Heathfield with his wife and daughters. Today the community was still in shock.
We live basically around the corner. Most of the firefighters around here just hardly ever get called out. That's why it's such a big shock.
It's a tremendous loss when something like that happens. You know, one of your own, really.
It's emerged the company which owned the fireworks depot had previously been fined for storing explosives without a licence. Today the police promised a thorough investigation into Sunday's fire.
The actions we've now got are to assess, search and document the scene forensically. And what I want to emphasise with that is that this will be meticulous and also time-consuming.
Chief Superintendent Nick Wilkinson ending that report from Catherine Carpenter, who joins us now from the East Sussex Fire and Rescue Service headquarters in Eastbourne. Catherine, well, I suppose the key thing today is, has the fire brigade actually been able to get onto the site to start that investigation?
Yes, the news came through late this afternoon that the site had been declared safe for that activity, but we should emphasise that the site is still considered very dangerous indeed. Now, you saw in that piece the Chief Fire Officer, Des Pritchard, talking very emotionally about the two men that he knew personally, and he's with me now here at headquarters. Mr. Pritchard, I think the thing people are really wondering tonight is whether this investigation is going to turn into a criminal investigation at this stage.
That's simply a matter that I can't answer. It's a matter for Sussex Police.
OK, and I think another thing people have asked me today is how come two veterans of the service, a retained firefighter and a retired man, ended up being some of the first on the scene and taking the force of this blast?
When you say a retired member of staff, Brian was a member of our staff and so was Geoff. They were both there in legitimate capacities. Geoff was the officer in charge of a pumping appliance and Brian was there in an official capacity.
OK, thank you very much. Well, we've heard there again from Des Pritchard. Back to you in the studio.
Catherine, thank you very much.
In a moment, it's better with batter. Why this? Back now to our top story. The investigation has begun into the fireworks blaze that killed two Sussex firemen. Geoff Wicker and Brian Wembridge died in a massive explosion during the blaze at the festival fireworks site in Shortgate near Lewes.
Well, Catherine Carpenter is live at East Sussex Fire Rescue's headquarters. Catherine.
Well, yes, books of condolence have been opened to these two men across the southeast and tributes have been pouring into fire stations, including here in Eastbourne. These flowers have been arriving all day and the messages really sum up the strength of feeling, how this service felt it was a family and how these men were brothers. One of these messages reads, "To two brave men, rest in peace." Another says, "A tragic loss of two dear brothers, rest in peace." But of course, Brian Wembridge won't only be missed by his colleagues here in the service. He was also known well to many of us in the media as he went to the very heart of large fires across the southeast to bring us crucial news footage.
Just slowly try there. Nice and easy.
Just got the weight.
Yeah, he's out.
a reminder of some of the many pictures Brian Wembridge has brought to us over the years. And if you'd like to add your name to our online book of condolence, a reminder that you can do that at bbc.co.uk/Southern Counties. Back to you.
Catherine, thank you very much.
The Prime Minister has paid tribute to the 2 East Sussex firefighters who lost their lives at the fireworks depot near Lewes at the weekend. Meanwhile, police and health and safety officers have spent their first full day at the site. As Robin Gibson reports, fire stations have been the focal point for people to pay their respects.
Flowers for a firefighter, husband and father who paid the ultimate price doing his job. The tributes were for part-time Heathfield fireman Geoff Wicker. The moving words from family and friends were echoed in the House of Commons.
I'm sure the whole House will join with me in paying tribute to the 2 members of the East Sussex Fire and Rescue Service, Brian Wembridge and Geoff Wicker, who were killed tackling the fire near Lewes on Sunday. They died protecting their community, and our thoughts and prayers are with their families at this time.
A few miles away, another Union flag flies at half-mast. This is where the service cameraman Brian Wembridge was based. And across East Sussex, people have been adding their tributes in books of condolence. Today, pictures of the precise moment the explosion rocked the surrounding area. The shockwave enough to shake this camera.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't thunder. It was an explosion.
It's more than 7 miles from the centre of the blast as the family walked at Buxted.
We were walking Sunday afternoon in Buxted Park. I was with my wife and children, and all of a sudden we heard a very loud explosion, which the children immediately thought was a clap of thunder, but I think we soon realised it was a lot more serious.
Although the perimeter cordon has been maintained, it seems that just over a mile away there's been a lot of activity on the site. A health and safety executive official confirmed to us today that inquiries are well underway. The investigation is being led by the police. A detective chief superintendent is in command, and health and safety experts have been brought in to help.
We were told gas canisters, which had given safety concerns, were removed yesterday, and that representatives of Festival Fireworks UK Limited and members of the Fire and Rescue Service have already been interviewed. Among the investigators are specialists in working with explosives. Robin Gibson, BBC South East Today, Halland.
And many of you have been adding your thoughts to our book of condolence on our website. They're coming from far and wide.
They are indeed. Here's one from Mandy Arnold in Spain. At this terrible time, I just wanted to send my deepest sympathy to both families. There is nothing we can do to help, but we do just let you know that we're thinking of you all.
Jeffrey Heathcock from Cambridge says it's times like this we're reminded of the debt we owe to firefighters everywhere.
Orange Watch from Staffordshire Fire and Rescue. It's a reminder to all of us the dangers that exist out there and the commitment of the people who put themselves in these situations in order to protect others.
And Karina Jenkins says, I've known Brian Wembridge all my life. He was a great man, always happy and joking. He was the only 63-year-old I knew who wanted to go to Ibiza clubbing.
So plenty of those on our websites. You can add yours at the usual website address. Thank you for them. In a moment, the excitement...
Well, good evening. As you can see, the flag here at Crowborough Fire Station is still flying at half-mast. And just next to me here, some of the many floral tributes left to Brian Wembridge. Brian, of course, one of the 2 firefighters, the other Geoff Wicker, who were killed in the fireworks explosion near Halland just about 2 weeks ago. Well, since then, the fire station here at Crowborough and the one at Heathfield have become the focuses for their community's grief. Well, today it was the turn of Crowborough to say goodbye to the man who'd lived and worked in the town for more than 30 years. Natalie Graham has our report.
Brian Wembridge left his fire station for the last time. He was carried on a turntable ladder in keeping with fire service tradition. A seat was left empty on the fire engine that followed to signify the loss of a team member. The funeral cortege, led by East Sussex's chief fire officer, made its way through the streets of Brian's hometown. Past the Constitutional Club, where he was a member. and towards the church, where a guard of honour awaited him. His colleagues from East Sussex were joined by firefighters across the country, come to pay their respects. The pallbearers were all firemen who worked with Brian at Crowborough. And as his family joined the congregation inside the church, a crowd gathered outside to listen to the service.
Brian was a very caring person. Brian would always want to help. He gave his life seeking to help the community. I knew Brian personally. He was a friend. He was a considerate man. He would always look to go the extra mile.
A colleague for about 18 years, and I saw him at incidents and obviously in the workplace, and often had a laugh and a joke.
And fond memories. What I would describe as a gentleman, to be quite honest, you know. A gentleman in the first degree, very dedicated to his job, had been for many years, you know. Yes, just a lovely fella, a good family man.
After the funeral, the Guard of Honour lined the streets once more as Brian Wembridge, a man who dedicated 45 years of his life to public duties, was taken by his family for a private cremation.
That report from Natalie Graham. Well, the fire that claimed the lives of both Brian Wembridge and Geoff Wicker took place just a few miles from here in Crowborough. On Sunday, the 3rd of December, a massive explosion engulfed a fireworks depot near Halland. Both of the firefighters were amongst the first on the scene. Well, just across the road here at Crowborough Fire Station is the Constitutional Club, and that's where Brian used to play snooker with many of his friends. Well, tonight, many of them have gathered to share their memories, and earlier, Ian Palmer went to meet them.
850 members, only one Brian Wembridge. The family man loved golf, bird watching, and this was Brian's table. He played here on Tuesdays and Sundays. Snooker is a game of skill, nerve and patience. Truth is, Brian wasn't very good. Safe to say he had more friends than games won.
I played years ago when there was about 4 or 5 firemen all in the same snooker team. The game would be interrupted by the bleepers, and without any sort of signal, the other 4 would turn to Brian and say, "Go and see what's happening, Charlie, and let us know whether we're needed." And off he'd trot. And sometimes he'd come back and say, "No, it's all right, lads," and other times he'd shout through the door, "Come on, we're needed," and off they go.
Others can't believe he won't be back.
On the first day we met, we really struck up a good relationship, and Brian advised me to come to Crowborough, and that completely changed my life. So I have a lot to thank Brian for.
Here's to Brian. What about the champagne? It won't be the last toast to the former firefighter. Friends have travelled the world to be here, some from as far away as southern France. How will you remember?
As one of life's gentlemen, very kind, could never say no, and he would do anything for you. True friend, true gentleman.
Brian was a member here for 25 years. He occasionally played cards. He sometimes lost money doing it. Everyone likes to come out on top, but in the end, it's how you played the game that matters. Brian Wembridge played a blinder. Ian Palmer, BBC South East Today, Crowborough.
Wonderful memories of Brian Wembridge there, and I'm joined by one of Brian's close friends and colleagues, Trevor Funnell. Trevor, you knew him for 10 years. What are your fondest memories of him?
I mean, remembering Brian, really, all I can think of is the fact that he was a very kind man, very generous, always willing to help his colleagues, and would put himself out without any question at all. He was very dedicated to his work and played a very significant part for the fire service.
And he played a very big part in the training of many firefighters, didn't he?
Indeed. Brian's actually worked at the training centre in the past, and a lot of the video footage that he shot was used for training benefit.
Of course, we used a lot of his footage as well. I mean, he loved everything. Everything he did with great passion, didn't he?
He did indeed. He was very enthusiastic about his job, very, very enthusiastic about working with the brigade, both through the video footage and through his past career as an operational firefighter. He was extremely committed to the job.
And so proud of everything that not just he achieved, but every firefighter, especially the ones that he'd schooled.
Yes, he was always very, very supportive of anybody's progress through their own career. Again, back to the video footage, he was very, very keen to provide people footage of their successes, incidents, and always very supportive.
Trevor, thank you. I know you and your colleagues will miss him very much, as we all. Well, we'll be back a little bit later in the programme. Meanwhile, if you want to pay your respects to Brian and to Geoff Wicker, then simply log on to our website. The address should be up for you now. Many hundreds of you already have. Back to you, Geoff.
He was one of the good guys, wasn't he? Beverly, thanks very much. Now tonight we finish as we started. Hundreds of firefighters from across the country today formed a guard of honour at the funeral of Brian Wembridge, one of the 2 East Sussex firefighters killed in an explosion earlier this month. Beverly Thompson is in Crowborough this evening, where Brian served as a firefighter and where he lived. Beverly.
Thanks very much, Geoff. Well, you know, we started talking about tributes, not least the many floral tributes that have been left for Brian here at Crowborough and, of course, for Geoff Wicker over at Heathfield. And you've been leaving your comments too on our website, and I'd just like to share a few of them with you tonight. This from South Wales Fire and Rescue Service. My fallen brothers, you've made the ultimate sacrifice for the safety of others. Rest now, we'll take it from here. This from the Baldwin family in East Sussex. Unsung heroes, always ready to help others unconditionally. God bless your families at this sad time. And Roger Sermon says, retained firemen are a breed apart. They put their lives on the line every day. I was lucky, my father always came home. Well, I'd just like to say that Brian Wembridge was a very special friend to South East today. He took many of the pictures of fires in East Sussex that you've seen on your screens. Geoff and I were honoured to be at his funeral today. A colleague told me it was a day for families, for Brian's family, the firefighter family and communities everywhere. From Crowborough, good night. Firefighters from across the country formed a guard of honour at the funeral of Geoff Wicker today. Mr Wicker died alongside his colleague Brian Wembridge in an explosion at a fireworks depot earlier this month. Today, the 49-year-old's coffin was carried on a turntable ladder fire service vehicle from Heathfield Fire Station to Mayfield Parish Church. Catherine Carpenter reports.
Heathfield brought to a standstill. The silence heavy as a community said thank you and friends mourned. In keeping with fire service tradition, Geoff Wicker's coffin was carried on a turntable ladder and his seat left empty. The cortege paused briefly at the fire station where he was officer in charge. Colleagues remember him as a leader, motivator and confidant.
Geoff will never be far from people's thoughts. He was such a popular individual. He touched many people right across the service. It was Geoff's voice that firefighters heard when they went out to calls, because it was Geoff mobilising them. It was Geoff giving them informative messages. It was Geoff as part of the team supporting them.
Geoff Wicker moved to Heathfield with his wife Heather and 2 daughters 8 years ago, and today the town paid its respects.
I think it highlights the risk that all the emergency services are up against, but it's the job we do.
It's just sad. It's just so sad. His daughter, his nursery teacher to Jay, it's just so sad.
From Heathfield, the procession moved on to Mayfield. Mr Wicker was born in the village. He went to the local primary school, sang in the choir and was married in the church where today his funeral was held. Tributes from his teenage daughters were read out. Others have fond memories.
I think it's almost impossible to try and find the words to describe, the loss of, particularly someone like Geoff, the watch manager, the mentor, who brought so many people, younger members of the station through.
Today, after 31 years of service, Geoff Wicker was laid to rest, his colleagues promising, "We'll take it from here, brother." Catherine Carpenter, BBC South East Today, Mayfield.